Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. We're going to dive into three of the biggest Steelers-related topics of the week, and this is our first show on Tuesday after moving from our Thursday shows. The idea was, hey, those Thursdays are pretty busy, and of course, the first Tuesday that we attempt to do the show, it's quite the news day, so it's been a busy one for us, but that means we have a lot to talk about and a lot for you guys to engage with here. I'm Ross McCorkle, and above me here on the screen's my co-host Joe Clark. Joe, how are you doing today on this busy Tuesday?
Besides the extremely unhealthy amounts of caffeine I consumed earlier, pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I made the switch to decaf recently, and that's been not treating me well. But hopefully, I'll get used to it eventually. I'm not quite there yet, but we're gonna dive into our topics today. The first one, obviously, the big one that everybody's going to be talking about for pretty much all week here, and probably the next multiple weeks, if I had to guess. Russell Wilson appears to be in line to potentially start. Now, Mike Tomlin, during his Tuesday press conference, wasn't, he was kind of non-committal, but much more leaning towards, okay, it definitely seems like Russell Wilson could start. The language that he used was in consideration, and he kind of talked about Russell Wilson, not being concerning about his rust because of his status as a veteran and his resume and the totality of his resume, I think he said. And then, of course, Tom Pelissero swooped in right before the press conference and basically reported Wilson's going to be getting the first team reps, and he's in line to start. And so Justin Fields led the team to a 4-2 record, and Russell Wilson appears to be swooping in and getting that start in week 7. Joe, I know this has kind of been a debate, well, really, since dating back to March. Tell me about your kind of thought process and how it's maybe evolved for you. Like, did you started out probably on the same boat with everybody else, Russell starting, and then, now that we've kind of gotten to a 4-2 record, are you against this? Are you for this? How are you feeling about it?
I mean, I'm gonna kind of take the easy road out, and I'm kind of just neutral towards it because I mean, early in the season when they signed Ross, it was and he was gonna start, and that was the plan all along. Justin Fields didn't, wow me in the preseason. I was all on board with Wilson starting, seeing if he could kind of revive his career in Pittsburgh. And then Fields came out in the regular season. He wasn't great. He was, but he surprised me a little bit with some of his accuracy downfield. Obviously, his mobility has been a huge asset, especially behind an offensive line that's a little bit banged up. Not a little bit banged up, it's a lot banged up. And so, that's was something that's kind of helped this offense out a ton. He's been able to use his legs. And so if I had to make the decision, which thank God I don't, I would have stuck with Field just because you're 4-2. He's shown you some stuff that you can still work with. He's shown you can win with him. But I am excited to see Russell Wilson. I mean, the arm talent, it's always been there. His deep ball is one of the best in the league. And for an offense that, even though they put up 32 points, it was on a lot of short fields. They haven't been able to sustain drives. So I'm excited to see maybe we get little bit more splash with Wilson. I'm just excited to see them kind of maybe open things up in terms of throwing the ball a little bit more, spreading the ball around, utilizing the middle of the field more, all the stuff that, a normal starting quarterback should be able to do. I'm excited to see how Wilson can look and operate, but I'm also concerned, he obviously doesn't have the same mobility, which Mike Tomlin acknowledged, and the offensive line. Broderick Jones has been really bad this year. Zach Frazier is going to be out this week. James Daniels is out for the season. And if Wilson can't really move that well, under center, he's going to get crushed. So I'm a little apprehensive with it, but I'm excited to see how things look. Because I do think that, I know Mike Tomlin was non-committal, but he did kind of say when they asked him about how the offense would change with Wilson, he said it remains to be seen. That was kind of a hint to me that the plan is to start Wilson. And then obviously Pelissero's report right before the press conference basically said that Wilson is going to start. And even though Tom didn't explicitly say it, the tone, the vibe that I think a lot of people got was that Wilson will be starting. So it's going to be really interesting. I mean, Sunday night prime time, a lot of people are going to be watching. So if Wilson struggles, then, kind of an egg on Tomlin's face, making the move away from Fields, even though Fields is coming off, 2 games where he struggled a little bit too. So the timing makes some measure of sense. And I do think it could work out, but you never know. It's a huge decision, the biggest decision of the season, and it's really going to determine how far the Steelers can go this year.
Yeah, I think this is a little behind the scenes for Steelers Depot, but right after the game, it was pretty much a poll within our chat room, and it was basically, how many of you would take Fields and how many of you would take Wilson? And I think this was more like, what would you do if you were in charge kind of thing, not necessarily predicting what the Steelers would do. And I think it was almost unanimous for Fields staying in, and so a lot of people wanted him to stay. I think I was the only one to pick Wilson, and I wrote that article on Monday. People were not happy with it, but hey, here we are, and it looks like that might have been correct. And I'm not saying that this was the correct move. Who knows? I don't think anyone knows what the correct move is yet. That remains to be seen based on the play on the field. But I come back to, they need to see what they have in Russell Wilson. You can't have a potential future Hall of Fame quarterback sitting on the bench all season, or you can't just let him, release him or whatever, trade him, whatever, various media pundits have suggested they do with him. You can't do that until you've kind of seen what he actually looks like in a start. He obviously played a little bit in the preseason, but the preseason's the preseason. We've learned over the years not to really trust that at all. And he only really started, the most he played was 5 drives in the week, I think it was the second preseason game there. So, yeah, they need to see what they have in him. This is the best opportunity to do it. If they do indeed end up starting him this week against the Jets, then they will almost certainly start him the following week against the Giants, I would presume, unless it's just a complete disaster. I would think, hey, this is kind of his 2-week window prior to the bye. The bye week can serve as kind of a refocus for making the decision for, okay, well, now we have 2 games of data from Russ. We've got 6 games of data from Fields. What are we going to do? And so that's kind of the way that I see it right now. But, the throwing thing, I've seen a lot of people suggest, okay, well, Justin Fields has just as good of a deep ball. We've seen that. Russ. So it's just kind of like a wash in terms of, is he really going to open up the passing game? But there's stuff you can't really measure in the passing game. Like, is he getting through his reads on time? Is he, hitting these guys open across the middle of the field? There's certainly been a number of those this year for Fields that he just hasn't seen or hasn't gotten the ball out on time or whatever it might be. I think he's improved. I think he, all of this to say, I'm quite pleased with Justin Fields' progression. It's not that I wish to see him out the door. I think he's definitely a viable option for 2025 and beyond, and maybe even the end of this season. I just think they need to see Russell Wilson. I think he, has a little bit more touch on the ball. There's been some intermediate and short passes where Fields absolutely just launches that thing at 100 miles an hour and not so much touch. Quarterbacks have to have a little bit of both. You got to be able to launch it. You got to have some touch. And I think Russell Wilson brings that right now. And he'll hopefully balance this offense. But yeah, we're going to see a lot of takes this week in terms of, kind of criticizing the Steelers. And until Russell Wilson has a good performance, that is going to continue. A lot of people are very confused. 4-2, and you're moving away from Field. So, Joe, any other thoughts on that before we move on to the next topic?
Yeah, no, just like you said about the touch. I mean, we saw it even against the Raiders when he rifled the ball to Jalen Warren, that God only knows how Warren is able to fall on that ball. There's like 6 Raiders in the vicinity, and he somehow managed to fall on that. That would have been a fumble. I mean, and even with Fields, we saw it was the roughing the passer and negated a turnover. So we've seen some stuff where he's gotten a little bit lucky, the last 2 weeks. And he had against Las Vegas. I'm going to keep saying Oakland. Against Las Vegas, he had, the series, he had three very open receivers, and he just, poorly thrown ball. So I definitely think, in terms of the passing game, Wilson is going to be an upgrade. I'm just a little bit concerned about the loss of mobility behind this offensive line. But when it comes to actually throwing the football, I think the Steelers are probably in a better spot right now with Wilson than they would be if they had stuck with Fields.
Yeah, the mobility thing, that is the most valid critique in my mind is, okay, is this just going to be a sack fest, and is Wilson going to get hurt, pretty much immediately again? I don't rule that possibility out, but hopefully the Steelers start seeing less stacked boxes. Wilson can hopefully alleviate some of that and bring balance back to this offense, allow Najee Harris to build upon his great Week 6 performance there. All of these would be positive things for the offense. The offense hasn't put up a complete performance through 6 games. There's been a half here and there, or even just a quarter here and there. I mean, the Colts game, it was really the final 20 minutes. So basically just a little over a quarter worth of play where Fields was on fire and he kind of almost took over the game. Last week, I don't know if he really ever rounded into form last week against the Cowboys. I don't know if he really ever rounded into form. He had a couple of maybe good drives there, but yeah, it's been just kind of too up and down, and they can't rely on the defense and the special teams to consistently provide the sparks. The offense eventually has to be the one sparking the team to have sustainable success, especially if they want to win in the playoffs. And so, you just got to take a look and see if Wilson's going to be that guy. We're going to move on to the next topic here. And Joe, I'll let you take this one away with the injury update from Tomlin on Tuesday.
Yeah, so some, semi-positive injury news, some not so great injury news. Zach Frazier, Tomlin ruled out for Sunday. The good news is that injury, Tomlin confirmed. Jordan Schultz reported on Monday that it's week to week, and Tomlin confirmed that it's a week to week injury. I mean, anytime you see a guy get rolled up on and on the ground in pain, you always kind of worry about the worst possible scenario. But for Frazier, it seemed to be avoided. There's no structural damage, just an ankle. He'll be out Sunday. Ryan McCollum will step in. I mean, he looked pretty, from what we saw on Sunday, he looked pretty good. Najee Harris had his huge run. I think the play after McCollum came in the game, obviously it was to the outside. But Mike Tomlin had a lot of praise for McCollum in his press conference today. Said, he's kind of wise beyond his years. He's a great communicator. So we'll see. It'll be his first start in the Steelers uniform. Nick Herbig also out again with his hamstring injury on Sunday. But on the positive side, Alex Highsmith is coming back. So that mitigates the loss of Herbig a little bit. Or Highsmith isn't definitely coming back, but Tomlin said they're really optimistic about getting him back. And I think it was a week and a half ago, Mark Cabali had reported that this is their target game for Highsmith to come back. So I think all signs are kind of pointing to him getting back. He hasn't played since week 3 after he re-aggravated a groin injury he had in the preseason. And then Tomlin left the light on for Cordero Patterson, DeMonte Casey, and Michael Pruitt as well. So getting some depth pieces back. Patterson looked good against the Colts before he left with his injury, kind of round the running back room back into form. So all in all, pretty good news. Hopefully Highsmith is able to get back out there. Not having Frazier, he's been one of the best centers in the league as a rookie, best, offensive rookies in the league. Even he was getting some offensive rookie of the year consideration in a few of those way too early awards write-ups. So that's going to be a big loss, but we'll see how McCollum can handle it. Tomlin certainly seems to think that he's going to be a capable fill-in. Obviously, he made the 53-man roster for a reason, so intrigued to see how he does in his first career start. Especially, with all the quarterback center exchange issues we've had, we might see a new quarterback and a new center on Sunday. So be interesting to see how that works out.
Yes. I think hopefully Russell Wilson definitely has more experience under center and stuff like that. So hopefully we're not seeing any more aborted snaps. We've had our fair share of those. But yeah, this is last week was the first time all season that the Steelers had the starting 5 combination of offensive linemen in back-to-back weeks. So in week 5 and 6, they had that, and now we're already back to getting off the right path in that regard. Frazier out, so in 7 weeks there will have been basically 6 different. Well, it's not 6 different combinations, but there haven't been the same twice in a row, other than just the last week. So that is tough, especially we talked about the offensive line needing to gel. There's a lot of young pieces. You got McCormick in there. Now you're going to have, McCollum next to a McCormick and next to, I guess, Seumalo is back. So that's a positive. But yeah, it's rough for the offensive line, and really not talked about enough in terms of why this offense isn't taking off how we hoped. If you had guys like Fautanu and James Daniels still in there, and if Fautanu was still in there, maybe, Broderick Jones is able to start practicing on the left, and maybe he's starting to look better, and you kind of have all these different synergies that would open up if they had some luck on the offensive line. The last 2 years, ton of luck. This year, not so much. In terms of the outside linebacker play, definitely good to be getting Highsmith back. TJ Watt, he's obviously been super productive, but not in his traditional sense with the gaudy sack numbers this season. And I think part of that is just because of some of the injuries and stuff opposite him. And so hopefully getting Highsmith back, you're starting to see some of these sack numbers return for the outside linebacker group. The running back room, the tight end room, I think if Cordell Patterson and Michael Pruitt are able to return, that is kind of a sneaky boon to this offense. They run a lot of 12 and 13 personnel. They like to get Michael Pruitt in there. He's a receiving threat in those packages. And then we saw what Patterson was capable of against the Colts. And so, if they have three good running back options and they have all of their tight ends available, that is exactly what Arthur Smith likes his offense to do. And so I think that could be a big thing for the Steelers. We'll see more about that as the week goes on with the practice reports. And we're going to move into our final topic, wrapping up week 6. And the Steelers won that game 32-13 against the Las Vegas Raiders. It was basically a home game with how many Steelers fans were there. Mike Tomlin, a bunch of the players talked about how special it was to be a part of that environment. I was there a year ago, and I can confirm it was quite Steelers slanted in the crowd, and from the sounds of it, it might have been even more so this year. And so, that is obviously a huge boon to the team. Joe, what are your high-level takeaways for this game?
I mean, my first one is I can't even remember the last time. I guess it was, the Bengals game last year was probably the last time in week, 16, that the end of the game, you weren't, sweating and wondering what was going to happen. So that was kind of nice to have a little bit of a more relaxed environment and a relaxed game and a big win. TJ Watt, I mean, Dan Orlovsky gave him MVP consideration after his performance. He had 2 punch-outs, 2 forced fumbles, including 1 on the goal line. The defense, after a really rough first drive, and after that first drive, I was annoyed because all week you heard from the defense that, their communication issues, all their problems are fixable. They're fine. They just need, to simplify things. Everything's going to work out. It's not a huge issue. And they got bullied by the Raiders on the first drive, and it was, brutal. And then after that, completely locked in. Watt was incredible. Dante Jackson had the interception. Just all in all, the defense really stepped up. So I was really happy with how they played. The short fields were huge. Jeremiah Moon on the punt block. Danny Smith always finds a way to cook up a way to. I mean, the Steelers have 4 punt blocks the last 2 years, which is and it's really hard to block a punt, and for them to do that is really, really impressive. My biggest one, I think, is just Najee was just a man possessed that game. He's even short runs, he's still running through people. He's dragging defenders, and then we saw some explosive runs. We saw the long touchdown run. We saw another 15-yard run. He came to play, and that's what the Steelers need out of Najee Harris. And I think he averaged over 8 yards a carry. It was probably the most efficient game of his career. 14 carries, I think it was 106 yards. Added 2 receptions out of the backfield. So just awesome game from Harris, and kind of made up for some of Fields' warts. Fields used his legs well, ran for 2 touchdowns. But as we talked about earlier, his accuracy wasn't great. There's definitely some issues there. And as you said, he just never really seemed to get into a rhythm throwing the football. So wasn't a great performance out of him. Was one where, early on, we were getting ready to write about Russell Wilson coming into the game because he wasn't playing that well. So a little bit concerning just from that front last week. But everything else was, went according to plan. I mean, you can't really complain. The only other thing is Roman Wilson. He made his debut, but he only played 5 snaps. Mike Tomlin kind of just said, still a long process for him getting on the moving train. So wouldn't expect to see much of Wilson, at least the next 2 weeks, maybe after the bye. He'll become a more featured part of this offense, but just not – you see his debut, you got a little excited. Maybe he can make an impact, but he was barely on the field. And then a week after George Pickens, his playing time was the talk of the town. He led the receivers in snaps, even though he didn't do a whole lot with them, which another thing to talk about. But he played a lot, and the team looked to get him involved. He just has to take advantage of his opportunities.
Yeah, I thought Najee Harris, very, very impressive. You said you felt like it was his most efficient day, and that's because it was. 7.6 yards per carry, almost a full yard over his previous high, which came, I believe, in 2022. I believe it was against the Browns that year. He had a very nice game in terms of efficiency. So he's had games with higher yards, he's had games with more touchdowns, but he has not had this efficient of a game, thanks large in part to having a 36-yard rush. I think he had another 20-yard rush, so the explosives obviously helped that. And yeah, like you said, he was bowling people over. He had, I think he was featured on the Angry Run segment today on Good Morning Football, which, if you're doing that, you're obviously running people over. That's what that segment's about. But he also had, a little bit of shake. He juked some guys out of their shoes, and you don't really think of Harris as a guy who's going to get out to the sideline and be able to streak up the sideline, but that is exactly what he did. He evaded, I think, Robert Spillane in the backfield and then kind of found that seam up the sideline behind a Pat Freiermuth block, and he was off to the races, and he really accelerated and exploded up the sideline there and pulled away from the defense. And so, we read or heard about Harris being more agile and cutting down some weight all offseason, and I don't know that I had really seen that until this game, and so hopefully that's a good sign of things to come. Now, Najee Harris, after the game, was asked about his rushing success and what led to that. He pretty much said, well, it takes all 11, and so he didn't call anybody out specifically, so to speak, but he did basically say, when the wide receivers are blocking and the tight ends are blocking and they're doing the dirty part of their jobs, I think is his exact quote there, then, that's what happens. The 5-yard rushes can turn into 10 or 20 or 36, in this case, yard rushes. And so maybe a little bit of a subtle jab, just saying like, yeah, we weren't really getting that consistent effort before, but this is what happens when you do. And certainly that showed in this game. I think Mike Tomlin echoed a similar sentiment, saying, it was an 11-man effort or a total team effort or something like that. And so, yeah, that hopefully is the beginning of a positive trend. We've been looking for that for weeks and weeks now. They've had a couple of games where they ran okay. This was definitely their most efficient. 183 as a team, 3 touchdowns, 5.2 a carry as a team, and that obviously was helped out by Justin Fields and his 2 touchdowns, 59 yards. So, yeah, the Steelers started to kind of find their intended identity. Albeit it wasn't the most balanced game ever, but definitely some positives to take from that. And yeah, the Pickens thing, let's talk about that a little bit. He was fed the ball a little bit at the end of the game. What did he end up with? 3 receptions for 53 yards. He had 2 targets and 1 reception for, I don't know, what was it, 20-something right at the end of the game?
He was 31.
So 31 of his 53 yards came on, basically garbage time drive, when you typically see the Steelers running out the clock, running the ball, trying to secure that victory. It was I think it was a 16-point game at the time, if I'm remembering correctly. And so the Steelers had a pretty comfortable 2-possession lead. So it wasn't a thing where they really needed to put the dagger in, which made a lot of people think, okay, this is pretty obviously them just trying to appease George Pickens. And yeah, so Joe, where do you come in on that? Like, in terms of, do you think this is kind of admission of maybe a problem that was brewing behind the scenes in terms of his involvement, or, were they just trying to do the dagger, as some people seem to think?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily sure it was as much of an admission as a problem. I do think they wanted to get him involved and get him, his touches and, kind of show good faith, get him his first touchdown of the year. He's their top receiver. I don't know if he would have had a problem if they did it, because, I did think he went on the facility on FS1 this morning and he said, I'm not selfish. He said, I'm the most unselfish guy in the world, which not sure about that, but, if you buy the idea he's not selfish, he's like, well, I just care about winning, which fine, all well and good. Like, you can take him at face value, but then it's when the antics that come with it, when he's slamming his helmet, he's wearing the open effing always eye black, but then you don't make plays when the ball comes to you. The ball in the end zone, I think he might have gotten the grab before him, the throw to him. It's like, fine, he didn't catch that one. There was one earlier in the game at him in the face mask against the Cowboys. He had a drop on a key 3rd down. So it's when the ball is coming to you, like, yeah, you want to get upset, like, oh, we're not winning, and, I'm not getting the ball, and you can contribute to winning, but you got to make the plays when they come to you, and then you can't lash out and act out, because when the ball is coming to you, you're not really making plays. So that's kind of my stance on it. Like, yeah, I kind of buy him in Justin Fields. He's not a bad teammate. He just cares about winning. Russell Wilson, similar statements that he's a great teammate. So I do think, the guy's competitive. He said, I came from Georgia, won national championships there. So, yeah, you want to win, but then you have to make plays to, help the cause. And so that's where a little bit, I think, frustration sets in when you're watching him. And is this guy supposed to be, your top dog, your number one receiver? He said he's one of the top 5 best receivers in the league. Well, then catch the football. Like, you just got to make plays. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad they got him involved late. He's a guy that they should look to get involved more often, but it's tougher to do when they do turn to him and he doesn't make plays. So we'll see in the coming weeks what he can do. So hopefully he's better. Hopefully he doesn't have as many drops, and we can stop talking about his off the field or the drama and start talking about his positive play on the field.
Yeah, to his credit, no big really issues this week in terms of pouting or anything like that I noticed. And yeah, his appearance on the facility was pretty interesting. When he said he's a top 5 guy, he kind of, it wasn't a direct jab, but he basically said, when asked, what would it take to prove you're a top 5 guy? He said, oh, well, some receivers are just set up schematically for better success that are just fed the ball more often. So more or less saying, he's not being fed the ball enough without actually saying that. So I thought that was kind of interesting from him. Obviously, he probably does deserve some more targets. He's behind his pace from a year ago in terms of yards. Obviously, in terms of touchdowns, he doesn't have any. I think he's slightly ahead of his receptions pace. So, yeah, it's not the kind of start that anybody envisioned for Pickens. Hopefully, Russell Wilson maybe getting in the lineup can help that. Pickens seemed to talk glowingly about Wilson on, it was this interview at the facility. I think he also said something nice about him on Adam Schefter's podcast last week, and so maybe that connection will be a little better for him moving forward here, and certainly having Fields, who is going to be running a lot of those balls in for touchdowns, that takes opportunities away from guys like Pickens, and so naturally you'll just see some more opportunities for Pickens in the red zone and stuff like that. Let's see. Yeah, Roman Wilson, 5 snaps. Very interesting development that I don't think we've talked about yet, but Davante Adams was traded today to the New York Jets. Amari Cooper was traded today to the Buffalo Bills. So 2 big, huge receiver trades, neither involving the Steelers, which is, I know, going to be disappointing to a lot of the listeners here. But yeah, Adams, or the Jets, more or less gave the Raiders what they wanted. Now, it was a conditional pick, but I believe they're absorbing that full salary. Is that right?
Yeah, they worked with him to restructure it, but they did absorb the full salary, so Vegas didn't have to eat anything in making the trade.
Which, yeah, so I mean, the Raiders more or less got what they wanted, and under those conditions, I'm kind of glad the Steelers didn't get involved, because that is a lot of kind of headache to figure out. And it seems like the conditional pick probably will end up being that second after all, and so it's a hefty price to pay for Adams. He's turning 32 in like a month or something like that. And Amari Cooper, I mean, that one was even more, I get it. The Browns they would rather trade to not the Steelers, obviously. But that's another guy who I don't think the cap situation for him was really all that obstructive to the team receiving him. And then I think it was just a 3rd round pick plus a late round pick swap or something like that, 6th for a 7th. So a 3rd and a 6th in total for Cooper. He's still a great receiver, and so the Browns, as they're kind of imploding and on a one-way ticket to the top draft pick this year, it seems like they're dealing away Amari Cooper. And so the Steelers are left with less options at wide receiver. Roman Wilson, only 5 snaps last week. The trade deadline's coming up on November 5th, so the Steelers only have 2 games prior to that trade deadline happening. They have the Jets, they have the Giants, then the trade deadline happens during their bye week. So they don't have a lot of time to kind of figure out, all right, is it like, do we need to make a trade happen? I think obviously we've seen that they are looking to make one happen, given their interest in Ayuk, given their interest in Adams. And so now the focus shifts to the field. And Joe, you wrote a little bit about the Jets making Mike Williams available.
Yeah, the Steelers had interest in him this offseason. They're supposed to bring him in on a visit. He signed with the Jets before that could happen. He hasn't had a good season, only has 10 catches so far. But, I mean, he's played well in the past with the Chargers. He's getting up there in age, but he's going to cost nothing to acquire. The Jets just have a logjam at receiver right now after getting Adams, Garrett Wilson, Adams, Allen Lazard. Kind of their clear-cut top three guys that Aaron Rodgers has now built a connection with through, Adams and Lazard in Green Bay, and then again with the Jets and Wilson. The last two games, their connections really picked up. And him and Williams haven't really clicked. His interception on Monday Night Football that lost him the game, I think they blamed on Williams running the wrong route. So obviously some disconnect there. And he's, an intriguing option. He's a big body. Number two could be a downfield threat for the Steelers. The comment section was not very much in favor of trading for Williams, just due to, his general lack of production this year. He has less yards, I think, than Calvin Austin on the same number of receptions. Obviously, Austin has the 53-yarder in his name to kind of buoy the yardage total there. But, I think in Pittsburgh's offense, especially if you go to turn to Russell Wilson and the downfield passing attack starts clicking, then that's a guy that you can throw the ball up to and can go up and get it. I think he's a nice compliment for Pickens in that regard. They can both similar receivers, guys that defenses are going to have to pay attention to. And in Pittsburgh, I think he'd get a lot more usage than he has in New York so far. So that would be one I'm in favor of. Other names that I know have been floated as trade targets: DeAndre Hopkins in Tennessee, Christian Kirk in Jacksonville. Hopkins passes prime at this point, but would obviously be a boost to the room. Same with Kirk. He's probably more or less in his prime, but not doing too well this season in Jacksonville. At least last season he was a little bit better. Not really sure, at least in Kirk's case, how the cap situation would work out. But I think the Steelers could find a way to make it happen if they wanted to. So we'll see. They're kind of now the second rung of trade candidates after missing out on Adams and Brandon Ayuk earlier this offseason. So whoever they're going to get, not everybody's probably going to be thrilled with it if they do get somebody, but wouldn't be a surprise to see the Steelers active right up until the deadline to try to make something happen.
Yeah, so more to come on that, and that's in just a little over, I guess that's 3 weeks from, is it 3 weeks from today? Yes, it is. So yes. 3 weeks from today, so there'll be a lot of talk on that, and we'll talk about that in future episodes as we have more trade rumors to talk about. And so we are going to wrap up the show with a listener question. And this is a good time to plug at the bottom of the screen, 412-254-3145. You can call in, or you can even text if you're a little too shy to have your voice on the show. Just give us a question, leave us a voicemail, and we will answer it on a future episode. This question coming from Austin in Atlanta, and it looks like a second-time caller.
Hey guys, love the show. This is Austin from Atlanta, second-time caller. Wanted to talk about the Steelers quarterback situation kind of from a bird's eye view. Week 1 against the Falcons, I was at the game, and I remember, I think it was the first drive, 3rd and 8 in field goal range. We hand the ball off and take the points, and I'm thinking, no problem, they don't trust Fields, all good. After the Colts game, when they're down 17-0, and you kind of see things open up for Fields, you're thinking, has this guy earned their trust? Are we about to open things up and really give it a shot? But then you see it come back down to earth in week 4 and week 5, in week 5. So then you've got a situation on that first drive of the game that y'all talked about where we hand the ball off in field goal range again. So my take here is they never gave Justin Fields too much of an opportunity to win or lose this job. I think to preserve the possibility of him being the future in 2025 or 2026. Like for the Cowboys game, we scored 3 points or whatever in the first half because they didn't give Fields an opportunity to go out there and throw 3 interceptions and have a bust label put on him and kind of shoot down the hopes for him being the future next season. So it seems to me they're just putting him out there as a kind of game manager role with the hopes that we can sneak out a few wins before their guy, Russell Wilson, gets back. Just curious what you guys have to think about that. Appreciate you guys.
All right, Austin, thank you for the question. And, this is obviously I think you probably called and left this, it was last Thursday. And so the Raiders game has happened since then. And now we know that it seems like Russell Wilson obviously is going to start for the Steelers. Not 100% sure on that. But basically your assertion is that the Steelers never really let Fields loose. And we're kind of biding their time for Russell Wilson to come back. For me, I know Mike Tomlin a couple of weeks ago was basically starting to change his tune and saying that, maybe Fields could be the hot hand. There's potential, I think he said, but we're not there yet. And then when asked what he needs to do, Tomlin said win. And then what did he go and do? He went out there and lost. Was that after the Chargers game that he said there's potential, or was that after the Colts?
I think he finally started to change his tune after the Colts game, but there was reports, I think Ian Rappaport and whoever else after the Chargers game that Tomlin could very well just stick with the hot hand and stick with Fields.
October 1st was when he said that, so that would have been right after that Colts game, I think. So I mean, what did he go out and do? He went out and lost to the Cowboys, and that was Sunday Night Football against basically one of the most watched games of the calendar. Probably would have been if not for the rain delay. Huge game against the Cowboys. Historic value and all that, and I think Tomlin definitely values that kind of stuff, people performing in those big moments, and Fields probably had his worst game during that game, and your assertion that maybe they didn't let him loose, well, that was actually the game where they let him the most loose in terms of his intended air yards. I think it was, let's see, it looks like, vamp here real quick, but it looks like 43% of his passes were between the basically from the 5 yards depth to behind the line of scrimmage. Everything else was deep, over 6 or, all the way up to over 21. He had the biggest share of his passes over 21 plus yards, intended air yards. 25% of his passes in that game were over 21 intended air yards, which was over double that rate of any other game this season. And so I think they kind of did let him loose in that Cowboys game. It just didn't work out. Now he had some drops. Pickens had a drop. I think Van Jefferson might have had a drop. And so, where do you place blame? I don't know. But Fields, I think there's maybe some truth to what you're saying, Austin, but I do think overall Fields just hasn't been getting the job done. I think they have wanted to see what Wilson looks like all along. There's a reason he's remained quarterback 1 on the depth chart. There's a reason he was pole position. There's a reason he was named the starter prior to the season. And I think we're finally going to see if all of that faith in him was kind of worth their time. And Joe, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. I think if the Steelers are 5-1 or 6-0 right now, obviously, I don't think they're making that change right now. Fields had his opportunity against the Cowboys. Yeah, I mean, he had another opportunity last week. Wilson was healthy as the backup. Fields could have had, a huge game and maybe made more of an effort to keep the job. And I think we're all kind of in agreement that those last 2 games were his worst 2 of the season. So I think, maybe there was some time, especially earlier in the season, where they had a little bit of a restraint on him, but the last few weeks, I think it's kind of let off a little bit, and Field just hasn't been able to take advantage. So I can understand why they're going to Wilson now, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that works out, because it could go really well or it could go really poorly.
All right. Hopefully we answered your question there, Austin, and we hope you do call back. Thanks for being a second-time caller. We always love to hear the repeat names and voices on the phone line there. So that is all for today's show. I am Ross. That is Joe, and we will see you guys next Tuesday.